Hello, Marylanders. I'm your Howard County Executive, Calvin Ball, and you're plugged into the pulse of our counties, MACo's Conduit Street podcast. Stay tuned for another timely discussion.
Hello, and welcome back to the Conduit Street podcast. I'm your host, Michael Sanderson. I'm the director and longtime veteran of the Maryland Association of Counties. Glad to be back in the saddle and hosting the podcast for this week. And I like what we've got teed up for this week. We're sort of mid-legislative session. We're closing in on crossover. And the MACo policy team is very active. We're at the table. We're in conversations. We're in work groups and trying to get a lot of things ironed out as part of the legislative session. So I wanted to talk through what the team at MACo is doing this time of year. So I got a couple guests from our policy team. First, Karrington Anderson. She's been on the pod before. She's our lead on health and human services issues, and then like a wide range of other things, including places where counties are employers and affected by different state laws and policies that affect employers. Karrington, welcome to the pod. How you doing?
I'm doing well. It's good to be here.
How's your session going so far, just generally, before we dive super deep in?
Yeah, we are definitely in the thick of it. I think as we're approaching crossover, I think this session generally for me kind of felt like it started slow. I think the first session I did in Tennessee, someone described the legislative session to me as a roller coaster. And those first couple weeks, you're kind of on the ride. You're slowly ticking upwards. Nothing really crazy has happened yet. And then kind of where we're at now is we are definitely doing flips and trying to hang on for dear life. But yeah, we're getting there. Overall, things are going really good. And yeah, I mean, it's an election year. And I think generally you could feel that.
I think that's a fair description. I like the roller coaster analogy in particular. I like the psychology of building a roller coaster where, like, I know nowadays they've got like heavy hydraulics and these other things, but the old school roller coaster where you had to get to the top of the hill and you'd be attached to this big chain, and they deliberately make them really noisy where you hear all this clank, 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 clank as you're going up, and it kind of builds the emotional feeling of that first drop. And that is exactly what the first 2 weeks of legislative session feel like. Clank, 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 clank. I like that.
Yeah, that's exactly where we are.
All right. So also joining us for this podcast is Charlotte Fleckenstein. Last year, Charlotte served as our session legislative fellow, but this year we have her back in a more advanced and more hands-on role. So welcome to the podcast, Charlotte. Tell our listeners a little bit about what you've been doing here as we've been approaching crossover.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm really happy to be here, especially for my podcast debut. And I'm doing well. Definitely still have my seatbelt fastened and hanging on, keeping pace as we approach crossover. Definitely a little bit of an eye of the storm atmosphere this time of year, but I said it in my interview. I'll say it again. I love the controlled chaos of session. So it's a busy stretch, but it's been a really great experience coming back this year, stepping into a larger role, getting to work a little bit more directly on some of these issues.
That's exactly what we want to talk about. And I like controlled chaos also applies very nicely to a roller coaster. That's what we like about that, right? So, all right. So this is kind of a brand. You have to be a certain personality type to like this 90-day roller coaster, controlled chaos, blender, whatever you want to call it. The game we play is a weird one. And for today's episode, I want to kind of dig into that and what it's like for you all working on the front lines and working sort of in this hand-to-hand combat. So a day in the life of a local government advocate. Karrington, let's start with one of your issues and kind of use one of your bills and one of your topics as a way to talk about what MACo does in the legislative process. I will say we sometimes focus on the big issue of the day, and as it turns out, MACo spends a lot of time working out things that are, I don't mean any slight here, but like relatively small issues or narrow or focused things. So talk to us about one of the issues you've been engaged on, hands-on with.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned that I also do our employee-employer benefits for MACo, and so that's kind of a big one for us, and one that I have been working on this session. And it's a bill that we've seen a few times, is a collective bargaining bill, and it's for local government employees and Public Employee Relations Act. So yeah, and just to get into it a little bit, so Maryland, we already have laws for collective bargaining, especially for state public employees, for the private sectors, for local governments. This has always looked a little bit different. Historically, it's been a local decision. And really for counties, we've been given the flexibility to decide whether and how collective bargaining works within our own jurisdictions. So really, this is important for a lot of reasons. Particularly, it's because something that we say a lot is that counties are not one size fits all. We vary widely in size, workforce structure, fiscal capacity. What may work in a large urban jurisdiction might not be feasible in a smaller, more rural county. So something that we typically ask for is kind of for that flexibility. And I think really with all of the employee benefit bills, something that we flag for the legislature a lot is we're different from the private sector. If there's a bill that has a mandate on counties and that's going to increase costs for us, we're not the same as a business where they can increase the price of goods. We either have to rely on taxes, particularly the property taxes, which isn't very popular, or our other option is to cut critical services. So it doesn't really put us in a good position. Our hands are kind of tied there.
I think that's pretty good framing for the general approach that MACo takes on a number of issues in Annapolis. It is kind of a common theme that one size doesn't fit all, but I think that makes sense in this case. Like that, the analogy that we're different from the company out there who makes widgets. I mean, I'm an old economics major and taught economics courses in the past and so forth. And economists are big into widgets as the stand-in for your product. But one company out there might say, well, we can just increase the price of the widget by 10 cents and we can cover whatever this thing is. But counties really don't have that luxury. And we're different in other ways from the private sector as well. I think that's fair too, right? I mean, like think of the accountability structure for your local government decision makers. We're just different from the board of directors for a private company or the private owners of like your local dry cleaner or that sort of thing. Like there's a different level of transparency and accountability for local governments. And when you show up and talk about that at the table in Annapolis, like that's one of the things that sometimes the light goes on for policymakers. They're like, okay, I see why things are different for local governments. You've experienced that before, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's exactly right. They understand they have elections, and that's kind of what we point to for counties. Our local government leaders, they are elected by their shared constituents. And if there is something really going wrong or a problem, then residents can vote for change. So that's exactly how we're different from the private sector.
And as I recall, as we have talked about the bill for this year that tries to create one template for every public sector entity. As I recall, that bill includes components like binding arbitration, that if management and labor are at an impasse and can't work things out, you may go to a third party arbitrator to sort of settle the differences, and then that person gets the final say in the process. And that's a really weird outcome for a public entity. And now you're basically saying, okay, this professional arbitrator is going to like set the tax rate for Allegheny County government because this is going to cost them $2 million to live up to their labor agreement, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the binding arbitration, that arbitrator could ultimately make the decisions that directly affect the county budget and the staffing levels. And for one, that arbitrator, they could not be super familiar with the fiscal capacity of that county. And then, yeah, it's the same thing. They're not elected, so they don't have that same accountability as we do. And I will say for the bill generally, it doesn't mandate collective bargaining. I do think that is important. It mandates the right to collectively bargain for all local government employees. And the issue there is that we would be participating in a state-structured collective bargaining framework. About half of counties do have collective bargaining, and that looks different per jurisdiction. Some have it across the board, some have it for their fire and rescue personnel, and we just typically argue that they're best suited to make those decisions locally.
Right. Yeah, and we have member jurisdictions who have said we're going to engage in full-fledged, collective bargaining over this whole plate of issues, and we'll even agree to binding arbitration for these particular units or these particular services or whatnot. But the public sector is different in lots of ways, and that's the perspective that you bring to the table when you go to a committee that's looking at labor law and employer policies and so forth, that local governments are sometimes we're the same as everybody, but in other circumstances, there are some material and maybe meaningful differences that they need to sort out when they talk about these broad policies.
Yep, that's exactly right.
All right. So this is what I was kind of looking for. Like, this is what you're doing, going to the table with concerns on a bill like that. But like, nowhere in talking about that did you say, or in your testimony is MACo saying, we think collective bargaining is bad, or that, we think this process is a flawed or bad process. Our argument is rather, this should be the province of the decision makers locally who are elected to manage and govern county government and those services. And that's a different message. It's subtly different, but it's
absolutely
meaningfully different. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, there are some jurisdictions who have been having these processes for collective bargaining for decades, and they don't want an entirely new bill that could hurt or impact the processes that they've agreed to locally. They've worked really hard on them. They're very pro collective bargaining policies, and they just want to do that in a way that fits their local needs. And yeah, I think the other thing is we really care about our workforce. I think that's something that county governments are known for, really taking care of their employees. That's how we compete with the private sector. We have these really great benefits. We just don't always want to see a state mandated system that could have negative impacts on our just operations and fiscal impacts, especially, which I know that this podcast talks about that a lot, but budgets are being submitted right now for county governments.
Right. I think that framing is really good. That's the kind of context I was looking for. And I agree with you that we can come to the table and say, generally speaking, counties do right by our workers. We give good benefits. We're not laying people off all the time. We're not unpredictable, volatile employers. We're pretty stable. We're pretty generous. We do right by our folks. And it's still hard to get employees to come in the door. That's the lay of the land in the public sector. So, all right, good illustration there. And Charlotte, I'd kind of like to do something similar with you. Again, sometimes the focus is on the big stuff. And, Kevin Canale hosts an episode of the podcast, and we go super deep on all these things in the budget reconciliation. And we talk about tens of millions of dollars and all that kind of stuff. But MACo's out there working on lots of other issues as well. Some of them don't have a $50 million price tag, but there's still local policy involved. So you've been working your own portfolio of issues this year. Let's talk about one of your bills and kind of what you've been doing to stay on top of it. What's worth getting into here?
Absolutely. So I think, as you said, a small-ish but definitely mighty issue. Probably my dogs at large bill is going to be the best candidate here.
Talk about dogs. Okay, I'll bite.
No.
No, yeah,
The jokes write themselves here.
Yeah, right. It's all true.
They really do.
All right. So what the heck is the state legislature doing talking about dogs at large? Walk us through it.
Yep. So it seems here like this story starts with a 2023 lawsuit where there was a dispute over whether or not it was your fault if your dog is unleashed on your own property and someone gets injured. And I want to highlight that real quick again, unleashed on your own property, because the role of the dog's location on an owner's property will come up again soon. But from this incident, we end up with this bill being proposed, and what it would do is require local governments to adopt a law prohibiting dogs from being at large and to establish any corresponding impoundment and civil and criminal penalty procedures as well. Most importantly here, this bill recognizes the definition of at large established by the appellate court from that case. This lawsuit was Blitzer v. Bresky in 2023. This is where we're going to start to get a little bit into the weeds when it comes to dogs at large. First and foremost, virtually all local county ordinances define the term as being not under control of a responsible person outside of the owner's premises. So the concern here about this bill particularly stems from the expansive judicial interpretation of the term of dogs at large. The appellate court defined it as being free, unrestrained, or not under control. So yes, quite a broad definition.
Yeah.
The opinion goes on to say the dog could be considered running at large regardless of its location vis-a-vis the owner's property. So this has raised questions about whether or not my dog is considered at large in my front yard or my backyard. Does my dog need to be on a leash in my backyard if I have a fence? What about electric fences where someone outside of my property might not recognize that the dog is restrained? But still, this bill would have that be the statewide definition of dogs at large.
Oh, right. So by the electric fence, you don't mean the buzz you and get hurt kind of fence, but the like underground a device. There's something on the collar or whatever, but like the dog is.
Yes, for the dog. So the dog is
Right.
physically restrained, but someone walking by might not necessarily know that.
Gotcha. Okay. So we get kind of a quirky court case that seems to say you've got a duty to keep your dog on a leash, even in your own backyard, even on your own property. And that court case effectively goes beyond what local ordinances do. So now we've got a bill in the state legislature that's effectively saying we think everyone ought to have the same dog law. Is that more or less what the bill says?
Right, more or less. And here what we're trying to really highlight and focus on is that one size does not fit all.
Right. So kind of, okay, this is an echo of the conversation with Karrington on her labor bill. But when you're talking about this bill and offering testimony, like, are you standing up there saying that's a bad law? That would be a bad dog law if someone were to adopt something that says you're responsible even on your own property? This is the wrong way to go?
No, that's not what we're saying at all. Here, what we're looking into is what laws do counties have on the books today. To no surprise, everyone actually already has a law of some sort about animal control. I think it's very important to highlight that counties certainly recognize that dogs at large off leash can pose certain public safety and health risks, which is why all of them already actually have established local ordinances. These laws, they vary from place to place. Lots of them are similar. Again, virtually all of them define the term as a dog being off or outside of an owner's property. So here, just not everyone is in agreement that they should go as far as the statewide bill would force them to. So our point of view is that this should remain a community decision. Our county officials are elected to take care of things exactly like this in their county. Animal control specifically is a highly localized process, and what works in a dense suburban neighborhood probably isn't going to work in a more rural neighborhood. So, for example, many counties have established certain exemptions for working and sporting dogs that are used for things like farming, livestock herding, or other legal sanctioned exercises like hunting. So what we're saying here is unless there's a really compelling reason, the thought process is, why does the state need to step in and tell Garrett County or Somerset County exactly what needs to be said in their laws about their dogs?
Okay, so that's really the bottom line, and again, similar to the argument on the other issue that Karrington raised, but it's not that this court case was a bad one for the facts of that case or for that one jurisdiction. It's not that we think that's a bad way to go, but that this ought to be hashed out at the community level. Right.
Right. That's our message here mostly. I think in short, what we're pushing back against is the notion that there needs to be some sort of statewide definition that governs local animal control policies when all of our counties already have functional and enforceable ordinances, again, that have been established to reflect the unique conditions and needs of their communities.
Right. And and so like I've been doing this for an awfully long time, and I've done my tours of duty at the witness stand myself too. And I feel like just like thinking about MACo as an organization and as a voice in public policy, honestly, this is what the General Assembly expects from us. This is us doing our job correctly. We have a role to play in policymaking, and often it is to stand up and to argue on behalf of local decision making. The state is going to need to decide whether we're right, whether we should win the day, and whether that issue should stay a local matter, or is this a case, like you said, is there such a pressing argument that we can't trust the locals? We have to make a statewide policy, and there are cases where they've done that as well. And sometimes it's the state sets the floor, and the counties can go further. There's a variety. There's different variations of that theme. But I like that idea, like you mentioned, trying to make one rule right here in this meeting room in Annapolis that's going to guide exactly what we do in Garrett County and Somerset County. I mean, those are pretty different places within the map of Maryland.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that we've mentioned Garrett and Somerset, and that's before you add in places like Montgomery County and Baltimore City. And this bill extends beyond counties to all municipalities. So all the cities and towns across the state as well. You can kind of see where one size fits all is going to be really difficult to stretch across everyone.
Right. And you can also, I think, understand why a senator or a delegate hearing from local governments this way and saying, there are reasons why we built the local animal ordinance that we did, and we needed to have these provisions for hunting dogs or for farm animals and so forth, that we needed to do these things because that's important here in Somerset. It may not be as important in Montgomery County, but for us, we needed to tailor this locally. You can see why a delegate might start out saying, okay, I'm worried about dangerous dogs or dogs at large. And then at the end of a public hearing, when they hear from all the stakeholders, concluding this probably isn't an area for us to try and get this perfect for everybody right here at this hearing room in Annapolis on some Wednesday afternoon.
Yeah, I think something to add to that, something that MACo can help provide to the General Assembly is just that broader context. They know what's happening in their jurisdiction, but we can come to the table and give them that broader landscape of all the different things that we're doing locally.
Yeah, I think that's right. And so I would stand up, I think, on behalf of like a wide scope of stakeholders. Like, you're doing your job. The Association of Taxi Drivers and License Holders should come to Annapolis and say, hey, if you change this law, it's going to be difficult for the businesses who are operating taxis, and here's why. I think we do the same thing. Your local government services are the way that you provide most of the things that Marylanders really care about. And so you want county governments to be able to do our job well and deliver back home. So like, we have an important role to come to the table and share these perspectives and be part of the shaping of public policy in Maryland. I think this is us doing the right thing. This isn't like, oh, you're a quirky special interest just looking out for your own hides. Like, we're here to make sure good services are being delivered in every neighborhood.
Yep, that's right. So we've talked about this court case, and Michael, that has brought something up in my mind. You've mentioned before in just the conversation that we've had that MACo has actually been mentioned by name in a legal reasoning before. Is that right?
Yeah, I can't cite the case off the top of my head, but I remember reading a decision from now it's the state Supreme Court. I think at the time it was the Court of Appeals, but there was a published opinion from the state appellate court, and in their decision was a specific mention. I think the question they were trying to resolve was whether the legislature intended this new language that they put into the law to be this big, complicated, burdensome mandate. And the court was trying to sort of divine legislative intent. And one of the things they mentioned was if this bill were intended to mandate everybody do all these services, for sure, MACo would have been at the table, banging the table and saying this is a burdensome, unfunded mandate on our poor county governments. We know who MACo is. MACo doesn't miss. They don't miss an opportunity to show up and say this is unfair to your counties. And the absence of MACo at the witness stand and on the official witness list for this bill is compelling evidence to the court that this was not envisioned as a big, broad, costly mandate. Otherwise, MACo would have been on it. And I read that as a complete badge of honor that, like,
Yes.
for sure, right? You and that's right. Like if this bill was going to cost us $50 million and take away money from all the services we deliver for public health and education and so forth, we would have been banging the table. That's good logic.
Absolutely. I love that. I want a copy of that. I want it in our offices.
Me too. I need to get that framed on my desk. It's actually kind of really cool. It's a little bit of a nerdy way, but it's cool. Just goes to show matters when you show up and also matters when you don't.
And I will not apologize for this, but like nerdy is low key kind of the brand of the Conduit Street podcast. So you're right at home saying that this is a turnkey moment for us. But yes, for us to get that kind of reflection in the judicial record, I like it. I want that. Yes. So, okay. As we record, we've mentioned we're running up to the crossover date of the 90-day legislative session. That means we're down to 3 or 4 weeks left in the session. Karrington, what else are you keeping your eyes on down the stretch? You got a broad portfolio, lots of different issues. Anything else that's worth mentioning? Not in a lot of detail, but just something that you're watching for these last few weeks?
Yeah, I think we are seeing kind of a lot of changes in the next couple of days, different work sessions being planned and to discuss and kind of work on some bills before crossover. One that I will mention is an economic development bill, and it has to do with non-disclosure agreements. And really, the bill is just written really broadly. It would prohibit an individual or a county or our county employees from entering into these non-disclosure agreements or NDAs with a person involved in economic development activity that includes data centers. But yeah, just very, very broad. And feedback from our people, especially in the economic development context, is these agreements are not unusual and they often do this in the economic development world. So I think this bill is a candidate. It needs some work. I think there's some recognition that it is written broadly. And I think there's been some discussion that they're interested in narrowing this, maybe just to data centers, maybe some further refinements from the committee. But this is a bill that I'm keeping my eyes on, and I think could be a candidate for something that could cross over to the House.
Got it. So I know as we've talked about that bill, I'm trying to find a middle ground to put a little flesh on the bone of the debate there. But from our point of view, like when we're doing an economic development deal, we might be providing some incentives for a company to locate in our jurisdiction. We might have our county's economic development office or a corporation that we work with or whatever might go out and say, hey, we can offer some sort of a payment in lieu of taxes or some sort of a tax incentive, or it will expedite your zoning approval if you agree that you're going to do these various things. And what the company might need to provide to the county is, we're going to hire 20 people in these technical fields, and the salary range for our employees will be the following. And therefore, it qualifies for the incentive that you're talking about. Now, a private company shares that data with Prince George's County in an effort to try and work out a deal so they can get this prime location and get some local approvals and some assistance to move in. But they wouldn't want to have that proprietary information just go out so all their competitors know, oh, well, they're hiring at X, so we can just do X plus 10 and hire away all their candidates. So like a non-disclosure agreement, like that might sound kind of shady for a government, but when you're doing economic development deals, you're working with private companies who have proprietary information, and they might say, hey, I'm not sharing unless I know it's not going beyond this table.
Right. And I think to your point, we absolutely support transparency, absolutely support
Yes.
accountability. It kind of goes back to the same things we were talking about earlier. We have accountability through processes like elections. And I just think with economic development, our strategies do vary by region, industry, county, the local market. And really, these decisions, like when to use them, how to use them, should remain a local operational choice. And I mean, we're trying to help our communities thrive, and sometimes these might be a part of that.
Okay, so I mean, that's the kind of stuff we're keeping our eye on down the stretch here. I know I still kind of work on the beat of some of these structure of government issues, which are themselves a little bit nerdy, but the rules for county governments to do this or that, or the way we structure our governance and that kind of stuff. And same thing for municipalities and the lines between municipal and county governments. I don't think there's going to be like a massive rock the boat thing that suddenly jumps out. But I would say in the 90-day session, most of the what the heck happened, most of those what the heck moments happened like right in this window. We're a few days before the crossover date is technically Monday. And so we're recording on Wednesday, the 18th. Like this Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday is the clearest window for a what the heck just happened moment. So if weird stuff is going to happen, like it happens right about now.
Fun
Oh,
times.
geez. Okay, hang on. That makes me a little nervous. So once we get into next week and House bills are still in the House, that means they're probably done, right?
Well, so yeah, that's always the thing. Most times, yes, probably yes, but it really isn't until the end of the session when you can really put a period at the end of that sentence. And really, I think we're kind of on our toes until sign die.
Yeah, I think we ran an article on the Conduit Street blog. I'll put a plug in for that, which was crossover date is coming. Why do we care again? And it's sort of like the subtle nuts and bolts of this process. So, I mean, it's still possible for a House bill to get passed out of the House after the crossover date, but then you kind of have to jump through extra hoops and so forth. And in most sessions, you look back and you find rank and file random bills that had a full 60 some days to get considered before crossover. If you didn't make it by the crossover date, that's a pretty good indication that it's just not ready to go and the House hasn't agreed or the Senate hasn't agreed to move the Senate bill. So we're mostly done with that stuff, but sometimes things will in fact rise from the dead. So we shall see. 91 days is when you start feeling safe. That Tuesday morning, look back at the final result. That's when you can actually, punctuate it. I like that. So, okay, friends, listeners, I hope you've enjoyed this little dip into the mid-session legislative pool with my colleagues Karrington and Charlotte. But we wanted to give you a little snapshot into what it's like in the middle of the legislative session. So we profiled a few of our issues, but as much as anything, this is what MACo is doing on behalf of our members, trying to support all the services that they deliver locally. We're doing our best to keep things on track and let the General Assembly make decisions sort of with their eyes open on how it would affect things downstream. So hope you've enjoyed the podcast. If you did, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast, and that way every episode will be sent right to the device of your choice. It also would be smart to follow us on social media. We're on all the usual channels, and you'll want to be reading the Conduit Street blog, where we have updates on both legislative and other policy and administrative issues that affect county governments across the state. So, for Karrington Anderson and Charlotte Fleckenstein, and for our producer Chantel Malcolm Lim, thanks for listening, and we will talk to you soon.